Hello in the sanctuary. Are you ready to let folks in from the waiting room?
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to SAJ-Judaism, that stands for all. For those of you who don't know me, I am Cantor Lisa Arbesser. I'm the cantor here since 2009. Very, very excited to have this program about Judith Kaplan Eisenstein and her musical legacy. Have these amazing guests with us we'll hear about in just a minute. This is part of a larger series of events that we have throughout the year, celebrating our 100th anniversary of SAJ. And we began the year with a beautiful musical service, and we've had a number of other music programs. And this is our second music program of the year. We'll have a concert in November, sort of ending and capping off the year of celebration. So our January 30th program focused on a number of important musical people in our history, including Judith. And so today, because of her huge contribution to the synagogue as well as Jewish music and synagogue music in general, we wanted to really focus today especially on her. As a daughter of the synagogue, more than just the first bat mitzvah, she became the first bat mitzvah because she was her father's daughter. But she felt that the weight of carrying this legacy, as we'll learn today, and we'll hear all about her contributions as an adult professionally. So I'm excited to hear about her. We'll hear some musical samples, see some images of important documents, and most importantly, hear about just amazing stories about her. Our conversation today is going to be led by Rabbi Liz Bolton in the middle here. She is currently the rabbi of Or HaNeshama, Ottawa's Reconstructionist community. That's Ottawa, Canada. She began her career as an opera singer and vocal teacher, studying and performing and touring across Canada and Europe. She had a stint as a cantor in a Reformed temple in Toronto, and combined with a lifelong commitment to activism, helped guide her to attend the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philly and got her ordination and Master of Arts in Hebrew Letters in 1996. After graduation, she continued to lead the Appy Chorus, an instant chorus at RRC. She taught liturgical chant and singing while serving as a chaplain. She relocated to Baltimore to serve the Reconstructionist congregation there, and then in 2013, she returned to Canada to become the first woman congregational rabbi in Canada's capital, the first resident rabbi of Or HaNeshama. Our next speaker is going to be Miriam Eisenstein, over here on my left. She is the eldest daughter of Judith Kaplan and Rabbi Ira Eisenstein. She served as an attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. She holds a degree in secondary education and special education and taught for a number of years before and after her legal career. Most importantly, she was brought up at the SAJ, where her father and grandfather both sat on the bima, and she celebrated becoming bat mitzvah here in 1951, chanting Torah and Haftorah. She repeated that on Zoom. Some of you might remember that, the 70th anniversary here last April. She currently lives in Chevy Chase, Maryland with her spouse of 30 years, Carol Stern. Where's Carol? There's Carol. And is a member, and they're both active members at Adat Shalom Reconstructionist Congregation in Bethesda. Our last speaker is Rabbi Robert Gluck. He is online if we want to spotlight him for a moment. He is a pianist and composer, writer, and professor emeritus at the University of Albany. As a rabbi, Bob served as executive director of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association, outreach director for the movement, as well as acting dean of students at RRC. He's served as a pulpit rabbi or visiting rabbi at Reconstructionist affiliates in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, in Ottawa, and then elsewhere. Born and raised in the New York area, he's written numerous books and articles and released a bunch of recordings of music for small jazz ensembles, duets for piano, and a bunch of instruments. His work has included interactive electronic installation art, engaging Jewish ritual objects and text, and his current compositional project is a suite of Zmirot settings for jazz quintet. I'm excited to hear that. Bob studied music at the Juilliard and Crane Schools of Music, undergrad at University of Albany, and graduate schools at RPI and Yeshiva, and also received rabbinic letters at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. So I'm going to now turn the program over to Liz, who's going to lead this conversation about Judith.
Thank you so much, Cantor Lisa. Shabbat Shalom. Great to be here. So in the decades of the last century, when Mordechai Menachem Kaplan was laying the philosophical groundwork for Reconstructionism, and Ira Eisenstein, among others, launched the Reconstructionist movement, Judith Kaplan Eisenstein flourished in the realms of Jewish music education and the emerging field of Jewish musicology. Along the way, she composed, arranged, conducted, and taught about the music of the Jewish people in ways that were both accessible and sophisticated. And we're really going to hear more from Mim and from Bob about those two elements and how they intertwined. So as the movement And its early adherents were writing and thinking and gathering about this new set of ideas. Of course, they were also meeting in prayer settings, in worship, in synagogues, in chavarot. Some were already established synagogues, and some emerged as the new movement was emerging. And in those communities, from this very building, starting 100 years ago, the words of the Siddur are carried to and from the Kahal, from the community, through the art and the discipline of song and liturgical chant. And we all know, I believe, and we all experience how much music matters when it comes to the collective prayer experience. We felt it this morning. We'd weave in and out of inspirational words, and then the music would sort of carry things up and in and deep and out and through each other, deepening their impact on us. The music of the Jewish people holds a powerful set of tools that expand and hold and contain the sounds and patterns, reaching back through the centuries while absorbing contemporary milieu at the same time. Judith Kaplan Eisenstein knew this and in turn taught it in ways that were groundbreaking in their time and continue to resonate in our time. Her work, I believe, offers a template and a theoretical grounding for what unfolded musically in the Reconstructionist movement and in the liberal Jewish world in general. We'll hear more from Rabbi Gluck, from Miriam Eisenstein, about her mission, about her advocacy in Jewish music, and how she brought those theories to life, both in communities at large and in Jewish settings. So to set the stage, here are a few scenes from her biography, her studies, her work, and leadership. So Judith, as some of you here and some of you on Zoom know, was the first of Lena Reuben Kaplan and Mordechai Menachem Kaplan's 4 daughters, born in September 1909. Her European-born parents provided her with piano lessons, along with a rich Jewish education that provided enough skills, for example, to read from the Torah on the Bima on very short notice. But even before the spring of 1922, it was evident that young Judith harbored skill as well as creativity in both Yiddishkeit and music. We have that image up on the screen. At 7.5, Judith composed a piece she entitled "Destruction of the Temple," embellishing what I imagine was her final draft with cheery flowers. The 16-bar anthem hopefully lifts from a solemn A minor through a brief passage of Ahava Rabbah mode to a rising A major in the final bars. We don't know if she was guided by her teachers at the Institute of Musical Art, now known as the Juilliard School here in Manhattan, or was inspired by her studies at the SAJ to situate this song as one of the lowest as well as most formative moments of our people's history. What we do know is that she offered the composition to her father as a birthday gift. On the reverse side is an elegantly handwritten note in cursive, dated June 11th, 1917, his 35th birthday, and includes an apology that the words were not yet ready. Imagine any 7.5-year-old you know signing off a birthday message, "Wishing you many happy returns of the day. I am your loving daughter, Judith." Young Judith continued to study at the Institute of Musical Art through the age of 18, attended the Jewish Theological Seminary's Teachers Institute, as well as Columbia University's Teachers College, where she received her BS and MA in music education in 1928 and 1932, respectively. 2 years later, she married SAJ's assistant rabbi. the future founding president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, Ira Eisenstein. From the late 1920s through the early 1950s, in addition to raising two daughters, and I want to acknowledge with delight that Anne Eisenstein is here as well, Judith taught music pedagogy and the history of music at the JTS Teachers Institute, training those who would become teachers, principals, and directors of boards of Jewish education in the post-World War II era of booming synagogue life. And I believe that's significant. In the absence of existing teaching tools, she would create and compose and arrange classroom and performing materials. Her bookshelf began in 1937 with the Gateway to Jewish Song, followed by festival songs in 1943, Songs of Childhood with Frida Prensky in 1955, and the magnificent Heritage of Music, the music of the Jewish people in 1972, and we'll hear more about that from Miriam. With Ira, she created cantatas on Jewish themes from episodes in Jewish life and sacred text, works that reflected so many of the principles and values central to her work. She composed song cycles and choral works and crafted singable English translations to many Hebrew lyrics that are now ubiquitous, including Hanukkah, oh Hanukkah. In 1987, she created a 13-part radio series on the history of the music of the Jewish people, and my friend and colleague, Rabbi Bob Gluck, will speak more about that, as well as other important contributions that we'll hear about with all our speakers. In the midst of this creative output, she began doctoral studies at the School of Sacred Music of Hebrew Union College in 1959, receiving her PhD in 1966. She taught at HUC-JIR until 1979, also taught for those few years at RRC in the late 70s and early 80s. When we speak of the music of the Jewish people, rather than Jewish music, and not just in Reconstructionist circles, we do so in large measure because of Judith's work. She identified and made apparent the content, the function, the depth, and the varieties of Jewish musical expression. Along the way, whether teaching a congregation to sing in four-part harmony, or writing about the ways nusach, or ancient liturgical chant, find their way into modern compositions, she maintained and enlivened and truly brought to life and made accessible an important set of principles. These principles revolved around questions of participation, aesthetics, spirituality, and craft, and inform the ongoing conversation that continues to pertain in Jewish communal life. Judith delved into these intersecting concepts of Judaism as an evolving religious civilization and culture as a vital vehicle for its sustaining and its transformation. I want to just make just one more scenario before we continue with the rest of the program. There was a particular private meeting as the field of Jewish musicology and theoretical attention was being paid to synagogue composition in America. A private meeting was convened in the home of Dr. Judah Kahn, the founding rabbi of New York's Reform Metropolitan Synagogue, to discuss, quote, the problems of composing music for the synagogue. Judith was the only woman present. Amongst the other distinguished composers and leaders who included Lazar Weiner, Yehudi Weiner, Hugo Weisskall, Sholem Sekunda, Eli Siegmeister, and Metropolitan Synagogue's honorary musical consultant, one Leonard Bernstein. It was the purpose of the meeting to determine whether 20th century music could make substantive contributions to the synagogue service. And along with Stephen Kahn, Judith was present in her role as co-editor of the Reconstructionist magazine's musical supplement. Judith spoke and wrote and taught and organized and left us with a rich legacy of scholarship and practice, waiting for us to explore more deeply, addressing questions of legacy, training, aesthetics, and pedagogy. In the anthology 4 Centuries of Women's Spirituality, Judith contributed an article, a chapter called The Spiritual Power of Jewish Music. It is in no small measure thanks to Judith's work that many learned about that legacy. We are grateful beneficiaries of her work and her creativity.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to take this off. Is that okay? Yeah. It's so humid. I'm seeing you all through a fog. First of all, I just would like to say what a pleasure it is to be here back at the SAJ. I'm still not used to the fact that the BMI isn't over there, but... And thank you so much for coming. My mother's fondest fantasy was that a congregation could be persuaded to sing the very best music produced by the Jewish people, maybe in 4-part harmony, as part of services. Now, she could have developed a career in music, just regular music, as a choral conductor or as a teacher or as a musicologist. And the truth is, she aspired to do that. But as the daughter of her father, she was charged with the responsibility to save the Jewish people. I should say she was stuck with that responsibility, and believe me, she experienced it as a burden. She was quite a rebellious person in her youth, and she'd battle her father on many occasions about many things, but she never rebelled against this mission that he imposed upon her. Fortunately, she really understood what her father meant by Judaism as a civilization, long before he wrote the book. You'd be amazed how many people don't understand. I mean, I'm talking to the choir here, preaching to the choir here at the SAJ, but a lot of people don't understand what that means. They think, what do you mean civilization? We would call it today a culture, not a civilization, in the sense that it's used by the cultural anthropologists. And I learned about it in school. And I learned that a culture is not a theory. You can theorize about it, but it's not a theory. When you visit a foreign country, you recognize immediately what I'm talking about. First of all, every culture has a language. We do too, several of them, with Hebrew at its root. All cultures have literature, whether they're, all cultures have literature, whether written or not. We do too, starting with Torah. All cultures have visual plastic art of some kind, even if it's only cultic objects. And please note, all cultures have religion. That is to say, a set of values and beliefs to which they give expression as a group through traditions and traditional practices. Yeah, we do that too. And all cultures have food. And guess what? All cultures have music as an integral part of their lives. Cultures don't survive in the abstract. This was Kaplan's biggest disagreement with Felix Adler and the ethical culture people. See, Felix Adler thought you could squeeze out the essence of all the world's greatest ethical thinkers and celebrate them quite apart from the cultures from which they came. Kaplan didn't think this was going to work. And it's up to you to tell me whether you think it worked. I don't know if it worked or not. It works for some people. But even if it works, it isn't much fun. I mean, that's the point. I mean, you could take a very nutritious diet entirely through pills, you know, and they're advertising them all the time on TV, you know, those vitamins that they say gives you all your fruits and vegetables. Yeah, but who wants to eat their fruits and vegetables through vitamin pills? You could do it, but it wouldn't be a very pleasurable experience, and how long do you think you could keep that up? So for a culture to survive, it has to be experiential. It has to be a culture, not just an abstraction. So, where does music figure in this? I know this is going to be somewhat oversimplified, but you'll have to forgive me because the time is short. My mother recognized that music helps a culture to survive because of three things, and I'll briefly talk about each one. Music is, first of all, evocative. Second, participatory. And third, beautiful. Let's take these one at a time. What do we mean by evocative? Music calls up our shared experiences. I mean, just think. Da-da-da-dum, 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 etc. Now, that's Yom Kippur. I mean, if you didn't have it, you wouldn't have Yom Kippur. Even when Kaplan tried to change the words, the one thing he didn't try to change was the melody. That would have been foolhardy. The shared experience is that melody. You know, would you believe there are people who think it was composed by Bruch? No. No. Bruch wrote a piece based on it. It's a very old melody. And what you might say, well, this is just a matter of nostalgia. Well, maybe it is nostalgia plus. Nostalgia plus is a very important element in the perpetuation of a culture. It embodies our shared experience in ways that other things don't. Now, granted, people have different nostalgias, and sometimes they can be in conflict. And of course, the Sephardim will have slightly different nostalgias than we do. But at least as to the Ashkenazi community, even there are conflicts of nostalgia. I have to tell you, for a brief period, not such a brief period, I was a member of Temple Micah in Washington, D.C. There was no Reconstructionist synagogue in the city. It was a Reformed temple, what can I tell you? Though most of the members were not originally Reformed. Not most, half maybe. And any of you come from a Reformed background? Okay. Are you familiar with the song that goes, "All the world shall come to serve thee"? Okay. Well, half the world, half of Temple Micah every year swore that if we ever sang "All the World" again, they would leave. And the other half of the people every year swore that if we ever sang "All the World" again, if they didn't sing every word, if we did not sing "All the World," they would leave. So some years we sang it, some years we didn't. So, as I say, conflicting nostalgias. Nonetheless, it plays a huge role. And it needn't be in the context of religious service. I mean, folk music contains tremendous evocative nostalgia for many people. And the songs we learned at the SAJ when I was growing up were largely from the Yishuv, from the pre-State of Israel Yishuv. Mr. Nathanson himself came from there, and he taught us all the songs we knew, plus all the songs that everybody sings. And I don't know if you still know them. You know, things like Seisu b'simchu b'simchat chag macha ukapayim. You don't know that one? Okay, or V'samachta b'chagecha v'hayitach sameach. Well, these were standard parts of the repertoire. We were brought up with it. The whole Hebrew school would be gathered into the social hall, same social hall, except the mural was on the other side. Same social hall, and we'd sit there, and he'd bang on the piano, and we'd all sing V'samachta, or Artzalinu, or whatever it was. But music was part of the Hebrew school curriculum as a formal matter. I mean, we had to learn songs. And also, as mentioned, my parents together wrote a whole series of these cantatas. They're really scripts with music. They're not, you know, like Bach cantatas. They weren't all sung. They were scripts with music, dramas, full of very carefully chosen evocative music. The most obvious one that you might know is, you know, "In the wilderness no wind blew." What is Torah, of which I have to say we have a graduate here. And Florence was in the second ever performance of What is Torah at the SAJ. Okay, yay. Okay. Her sister actually was in the first. In the Wilderness is from a piyut. It's the melody of a piyut called the Akdamot that are sung on Shavuot. Of course, for those of us who were brought up within the Wilderness, it's the Akdamot that are bring us the nostalgia for what is Torah, not the other way around. But all of the cantatas, the music is carefully chosen. They're all quotations, and they're all there for a purpose. And they can be used not just for enjoyment, but for pedagogic purposes. Okay, so much for evocative. Second, participatory. I'm not going to talk here about the argument, should we have a choir, shouldn't we have a choir? As far as I'm concerned, choir is participatory. First of all, a lot of us at the SAJ were volunteers in the choir as teenagers, but there were plenty of the adults who were in the choir for years and years and years. Second of all, the congregation usually joined in even things, I mean, think about it. Ein kamocha ba'Elohim Adonai. That was actually written by somebody, you know, and it was written for choir. It was written for choir. Nobody even knows it anymore. It got so participatory that it kind of ousted the choir entirely. And third of all, come on, listening to music is participating. Don't tell me you're not participating in an experience when you go to a concert. So participation in music is so essential. And sometimes it's evocative and not so beautiful. Sometimes it's evocative and silly. Like, I mean, if you've gone to camp, you've sung John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. I mean, it's certainly evocative of camp, and it's certainly participatory. It may just lack, you know, some aesthetic qualities, but, you know, each of these things has a place, even the silly songs. I mean, my mother was very into silly songs, I have to tell you. And she taught them to us when we were kids. Finally, the aesthetic. Now, I know how subjective that is, whether something is aesthetic or not. So we're not going to get into that argument. However, I think we could agree that, you have to hold this microphone for me because I need to demonstrate this, that Shehu note shamayim v'yosei haaretz umoshav yekara. Okay, so that is not beautiful. I mean, evocative, very much so. I mean, many people have grown up with it. And participatory, of course, but, you know, not particularly beautiful. And my mother fought her entire life against the Incy Wincy Spider. But, you know, you don't win them all. And, but this was one of her crusades. She really wanted the music in the synagogue to be good music. Now, I think we could present to you a little example of something that was always done from the bima, always participated in by the congregation. When my mother introduced it to Hal Axe, who was then the choral director, he was so moved by it, he said, I have to set that. Okay, I have to, you know, even if it's just parts of it, for 4 voices. And so he did, and the choir always sang it, but everybody always sang along anyway. So I want to give you an example from the SAJ, and I don't know how long it lasted here. It may have migrated to West End for some years, but we're going to give you that now.
And if you're familiar with it, please sing with us. from Bob Gluck. You want to bring him to the spotlight? There we go.
Shabbat Shalom. Can people hear me? Great. Okay, well, this is just really a thrill. And I knew that following Mim would mean two things. One is that she'd lay a wonderful background for me to build on and follow on. The second, she'd put out all this material that I want to riff on for the next 3 hours. But that's not my task. I'm going to speak about Judith and her pedagogy. I'll begin by reading just a few lines, and this is a little bit edited by me to tighten it up, from Heritage of Music from the opening chapter. And she wrote, "I want to restore connections. My own generation has been a careless, at times even a destructive guardian of its heritage of music. We have failed to protect the lifeline between the people and the music. The people gave the music life, and the music in turn pulsated in the people, passing from parent to child and from land to land. When we live for a moment with that music, we are touching the pulse itself, and our own is quickened in turn." A few things to note there is, as Mim mentioned, or maybe it was Liz, that Judith had both the great fortune and also burden of picking up the musical side of Judaism as a civilization, in part because her father charged her with it, in part because her father wasn't all that interested in it, really, wasn't terribly well informed about it, and in part because she was almost seemingly born a musician. And I'll editorialize for one moment, because as was mentioned, Judith was a student from childhood at the Institute of Musical Arts, later Juilliard. So was my piano teacher a year later. So was I once it was Juilliard. So was Miles Davis when he was 16. And we all had a similar experience that I think is really germane, which is a tug, a pull between the legitimacy of anything but European classical music. And Judith was able to find a way to find a course that addressed both and balanced the two in a way that I couldn't, Miles Davis couldn't, and my teacher struggled too. My teacher, by the way, she was the first generation of the ethical culture group that split off from Kaplan along with Adler. The two main pedagogical works that Judith produced, as was mentioned already, were Heritage of Music from 1972 and that 1987 13 half-hour segment radio cassette, really, series, and we'll get to listen to a little bit of some little clips from that series. In the radio programs, the recordings, she's described her mission as to lay out a history of Jewish music in three ways. One was chronology, from the start of the history till the present day. Second, geography, how music of the Jewish people was diverse around different parts of the world. And the third was function, liturgical, celebration, ritual, et cetera, et cetera. Her task in that series was mostly focused on the historical. Her focus in the Heritage of Music was really kind of different. It looks like that, although the chapter headings and the way you find your way through it is just like really fun. It's a very intuitive kind of walk through the life of the Jewish people through its musical elements. But her goal in that Heritage of Music wasn't just to tell that historical story, it was really to help reclaim a usable musical past. That usable past that she believed, as from that quotation from the beginning of Heritage of Music, her generation was derelict, and by extension, my generation is derelict, and on and on. And she saw it as her mission to help teachers and others remedy that problem, to rediscover that past, to claim it as our own, and then to make it usable. How do you take this rich heritage and how do you make it ours? And how do you not reinvent the wheel entirely, not replace it, not just have it as historical factoids, but to have it live and breathe through what we do musically in the present? It should always be part of that, however it may be expressed. So can we see the images? These are images from Heritage of Music. Part of her pedagogy was experiential, not just singing, but to play and have fun. And let's go to the next slide. Should be image 2 or page 10, I think. Okay, so Judith taught in her book, build your own ancient biblical instruments. Get some wood, get some strings, build them, see what they sound like, see what they feel like, see what the construction action is like. Next one, please. Hopefully you'll get like 17 minutes. Another example, build your own drum, build your own rotisserie minamin, sort of rattler. Next one, please. Learn some of the core musical modes, scales, materials, experiment with singing them to the words of the liturgy, to the Psalms, as if we were reenacting ancient biblical times in the Second Temple. Okay, that's it for those. I have 3 examples from the radio show. The first one, and I'm just going to provide a little introduction and commentary to each. I want you to hear her expressing her ideas. So the first is from the functional liturgical side of things. This was a very brief example, and I've edited these very, very heavily just to get right to what she wanted to say on topic. And she'll ask, so what is the basic model of musical materials, like you just saw displayed visually? How could they be applied to the liturgy? And then she says, how can it be, how has it been applied to Yiddish song as well? So let's hear example 1, and this is from Kabbalat Shabbat. This is audio 1.
In the Ashkenazi community, the Kabbalat Shabbat, the Welcome to the Sabbath, begins with a set of psalms chanted in a specific mode. That is free, unrhythmic song made up of repeated short motifs, all within a certain scale. The scale here is G to G on the white notes of the piano. The motifs are these. Together, they sound like this.
Adonai malach geut lavesh, lavesh Adonai, oz hitazor, aftikon tevel Baltimore.
I guess I left the folks on off that one. We'll hear it on the next one. So this one is from Sukkot. And again, here are the modes. She's going to explain. She'll again play that basic nusach, the basic material on that little electronic monochord keyboard. and she'll offer examples. In this case, it'll be a cantorial example in English, Afbri, Prayer for Rain, and it's followed then by a Yiddish folk tune based on the same theme of we need rain, otherwise we're not going to be able to eat. Okay, so example audio 2.
And Sukkot rituals. Here we have a prayer for rain and a prayer for dew, respectively. The melody is one of the Misinai tunes we have heard of before, and we find embedded in it that same wandering motif we have heard in other connections. Let us listen to a rather stylized version of the introduction to the Geshem rain prayer, the piyut called Afbri, in an English paraphrase which appears in the Old Jewish Encyclopedia in an article on Geshem by F.C. Cohen.
Thou hast appointed the powers of nature that gather water to bring the rain. Oh, let not sin deprive all thy creatures of this needful blessing, but crown all thy valleys with fresh smiling verdure, that they may live who ask for rain.
And finally, we have another example of the music of the liturgy spilling over into the song of the folk. Here we have the lament of the Jew in the shtetl, who says, Afbri, quoting from the prayer, there isn't any grain, the summer is gone, the winter's here again, and I haven't a penny to my name. The roof is leaking, the floors are cracked and creaking, I still haven't a penny to my name.
Afbri, es ist nicht was zu geben essen die der Sommer geht weg und der Winter kommt zurück und kein Geld ist als nicht da. Die Stiefel seien zerrissen, ai, 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 die Kutschme ist zerschmissen, ai, und kein Geld ist als nicht da.
And with that, we will pause in our exploration of the festival music until next time. For now, this is Judith K. Eisenstein wishing you Shalom Lehitraot.
I couldn't resist leaving that last little piece off. But the last example from that series of lectures, she wants you to know, if you don't already know, that most people assume that what is really what you heard when you were 10 defines Jewish tradition musically. And she wants you to know, well, actually, some of the core stuff that you're singing in synagogues, actually was composed in a very European-esque model back in the mid-19th century. And she'll explain that. And she also wants you to know, she wants to give examples, as Liz had noted, of how 20th century American Jewish composers were addressing the liturgy in creating settings for it that really lived in the kind of Euro-American classical musical world. So example 3.
There are many portions of the service for which there are no traditional chants. These are often high points in the liturgy, however, and have been set to music by many composers. Even the Shema, considered to be the central declaration of the faith of the Jewish people, has no traditional motif. That little tune, which many people believe to be practically divinely ordained, that tune is no more than about 125 years old, composed by Solomon Sulzer, the Viennese pioneer in synagogue music. In fact, a great deal of Sulzer's music, like that of Lewandowski, has been reduced to congregational singing, usually distorted but hard to dislodge from its acquired status as tradition. The other high point in the service where Sulzer's distorted compositions have become sacrosanct as congregational song is the set of verses accompanying the opening and later the closing of the Ark of the Torah. Just to remind you, listen to this.
Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch leolam vaed. Eitz chayim hi lama chazikim ba v'tom cheha meushar.
Let us listen for a moment to a contemporary composer's interpretation of that last passage. The late Lazar Weiner set words to music which say, "It is a tree of life for those who grasp it, and all who uphold it are blessed. Its ways are pleasantness, and all its paths are peace."
It's
So Judith was very far-reaching, future-reaching, but at the same time a person of her generation. So her assumptions of what would constitute contemporary music, preferred aesthetics, what's beautiful, what's engaging with one's time, all of these, which are really large open questions that I'm not going to try to address right now, she had her own particular preferences about, and some of that is what you're hearing reflected like in Lazar Weiner example there. The last thing I want to play is from a talk that I guess you could say I instigated at RRC. It was Ira and Judith's first return to the college after Ira had stepped down as president in 1982. And what Judith is speaking about here was alluded to by Mim about the listening experience. Mim described it as listening as participation. Here, Judith is talking about it well, you can see it one of several different ways, but what she wants you to know is that that listening can be a deeply spiritual experience, and she was interested in the spirituality of music making. She railed against the idea that the SAJ could be referred to as an intellectual place, but not a deeply spiritual one, both in its singing. But she talks about, on a few occasions, and I spoke with her a lot, about her first time she ever heard the Bach B minor Mass and what an amazing experience it was for her and what it taught her about spiritual experience through listening and ways in which Jewish traditions did not seem to reach for her to touch on some of what she experienced outside of Jewish life. And so finally, audio example 4.
In view of the fact that one of the tenets of Reconstructionism has been always from the start that we live in two civilizations and that we have a great deal to learn from our surrounding civilization, and by that I mean Western civilization, not the immediate culture of the 80s as it exists, but Western civilization in general. I think we have a lot to learn from this. I've been struggling all my days with trying to define what is religious about religious music. What is the kind of music that we should be using in services? We're not supposed to be a song fest. If we use music, it's supposed to be part of a religious experience. Well, what is the religious experience? Because I believe there is such a thing. To me, I think one of the most profoundly religious experiences I ever had. I heard the first Kyrie eleison of the Bach B minor Mass. I thought I would explode. I mean, this was an experience that touched one's innards as nothing I ever yet felt. I have subsequently had that kind of experience, I must tell you, by and large, always having to put aside the part that I can't accept and that I resent. And you get in Bach all kinds of religious experience. It isn't always the great solemnity of Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy on us. There's a great deal of sheer joyousness in some of the cantatas of Bach, where you'll have two women's voices singing of the glory and the joy of this world and this life. And that too is a religious experience. And I've gotten it by listening, not by singing. I don't dare open my mouth. I can't say that it isn't wonderful fun to sing in a chorus, and you get an even greater kick out of it. But it was listening to some of this music that gave me this tremendous sense of religious experience, of touching. What am I talking about? Of touching, of transcending myself, feeling a part of something outside myself that is greater than myself, that I'd like to be part of. And I tried to find it, I have found it sometimes in our Jewish tradition, and I have found it sometimes in folk tradition.
So to conclude, just a quick commentary on that. You know, when she talks about those aspects that she just that can't relate to or deal with, she's referring to the Christology. When she comments about listening as opposed to singing, she knew she'd get clobbered at RRC for sounding like she didn't think that the prime thing that should happen in a religious service was group singing. But under it all, what she really wanted was, as I said earlier, for people to be knowledgeable about, reclaim, make practical use of the past, to do so in a way that is deeply moving. And then she struggled with, so what does that mean in our time? Because she was aware that there were things that were unfamiliar to her, that she did not like, that were arising in her 80s. And she wasn't going to leave it at no, 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 none of that, but she wasn't going to embrace it. But she leaves that for us, for the next generations, as an open question of what kind of aesthetic, what kind of participation, what kind of listening, what does it mean, internal, external, all these then become questions that she helped open throughout her life and her work.
So for some here and in the Zoom space joining us from your homes, I have a sense that these reflections might have brought to mind some reflections and perhaps even some reminiscences. So we wanted to offer some time for a few moments, if there are some of those. And I had the opportunity to speak with my colleague, Rabbi Nancy Fuchs Kramer, who experienced Judith's take on music and Ira's on Reconstructionism from two angles. Growing up at the Reconstructionist Synagogue of the North Shore, where Iris served as rabbi and Judith as music leader, and also as a rabbinical student. So I'll launch this with a few of those vignettes. So I was told by Rabbi Nancy Fuchs-Kramer that at the event honoring the conclusion of Ira's service as rabbi at RSNS, there was a lovely event, and he was lauded and celebrated. Hosting this event was president at the time, Sam Blumenthal, and offering admiration and respect. And as the talk was coming to a close, after acknowledging all of Ira's accomplishments with praise, he said, and this is not word for word, but Nancy's recollection is the following sentiment: "But what really kept us going was Judith's music." Earlier, when Nancy was a teenager, and the community was still meeting at either a Unitarian or a Quaker meeting space, and before the formal service would begin, Judith would come and sit down at the piano and begin to, in Nancy's words, pound out Hasidic nigunim. And at the time, the neo-Hasidic movement had not really spread into the liberal Jewish community. Nobody knew what these tunes were. But what Nancy really remembered is that her eyes would sparkle as she would enthusiastically yai-did-I, and nobody would sing along. But did not stop her. One last reflection on the to extend from the itsy bitsy spider component of the Aleinu. When Nancy was a student at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, along with Rabbi Rebecca Alpert on the faculty at the time, would join with Ira and Judith as they led free high holiday services at Temple University, or around the Temple University campus, sort of evangelizing for Reconstructionism, to bring folks into the movement. And if Rebecca, or anybody in the future, as I also learned, would say Bayom Ha-hu, and then go on, Bayom Ha-hu, or never mind that, and then Ushemo, that's already 2 times too many. Because if you're saying Ushemo Echad, God's name is one, why do you sing it 3 times? So this was a few of Nancy's recollections, both as a student and from RSNS. So I thought I'd turn first over to Bob on the screen. Did that evoke any from your time serving the movement, or at the college, or following their retirement? Any you feel that you can share publicly?
Yeah, there is a difference. Well, they were congregants of Jonathan Kligler's in Woodstock, but I filled in for him a whole lot in my over I think the late 90s into the early 2000s. And I guess this is not about what she was teaching. She was the most adoring, supportive, engaged, instigating of people congregant you could ever imagine, in her musical ways, but not only in that way. And Ira was, of course, enormously supportive and just exuding love as well. But that was my experience of her and them in that congregational setting.
Thank you, Bob.
We have a few minutes. I just want to add, there are sort of 2 important legacies I think that Judith has left us that are worth mentioning. So one is this idea of thinking about how does music help the Jewish people get to where we need to be? And putting the Jewish people first, and then using music to get us there. And so whether the music, if it comes from tradition, if it comes from the past, if it comes from our ancestors, it has to evoke in us what it meant for them. It has to be evocative. And if it does not work for us, as Reconstructionists, we can say, that's okay. We're not going to sing that anymore. That's not working for me. So what I think one of the beautiful things that she did with the cantatas, and I really only know what is Torah, I've really only been exposed to that, and Mim, you can add to this, is that, there was you tell me if this story is correct, there was a confirmation class, I think, and they were celebrating their conclusion in 10th grade, and they had asked her to write something, and she wrote What is Torah? So What is Torah is written for Shavuot. And she wrote it in a style that was so specific to that period in time in America, so that the music spoke to the people in the room of that day, and it moved them in a way that spoke to them, and it made it celebratory, and it made it evocative. But if we listen to it today, with our modern ears, it feels very dated. It feels dated. And I think a number of the cantatas were written in that with a very specific audience in mind, but her idea that she needed to write music that was for the people at that moment. And music, you don't know when you write music how it's going to be received, who is going to receive it ultimately, if it's just the people, the 5 people you wrote it for, the 20 people you wrote it for, or if it's thousands of Jews who are going to hear it, and how long in history it's going to last. And so whether you have music coming from tradition like Kol Nidre that just stays and it just touches your heart, or you write something of the moment, and maybe it's just for that moment. She put the people first, and the music helped serve that. And I feel that as a cantor, one of my responsibilities, she's sort of prophetic in that way in teaching us that the music has to come first. I can't just do what I like. I mean, we mostly sing what I like. But there's stuff that we don't do, that I don't bring to you because, or maybe I tried it and I'm like, okay, well, I liked it and nobody else seemed to like it, so I'm not going to do it again, or it's not going to be appropriate. So really fulfilling that mission is really a lesson that I learned from her. Someone in the back row has, yes, Debbie Rand. And I want to say, if there's anybody online, if we could put the gallery back on, if there's anybody online who actually had a relationship with Judith, if you can raise your hand or raise your hand with the icon, it would be great. We would love to hear from you for a minute or so. Yes, Deb.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know Judith personally at all, but Abe Klatt, who I see there on the screen, let me borrow his copy of Heritage of Jewish Music, and I took it to my sister over Pesach, and we were playing through things to see what we remembered from our Reform temple. We found a number of melodies that we remembered. I also noticed that there were in there a number of Mizrahi or Sephardi melodies. And I was curious whether any of that entered into the music that was sung at SAJ at any time. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that Cantor Lisa, when I guess at the last program you had that you sang the melody that was, I didn't realize that Judith incorporated these Hasidic nigunim, which some of you know I'm very fond of. And there was one that was a Purim song that I knew that we sang all the time, that I never knew was originally a Hasidic nigun. So that really widened my understanding of, you know, her breadth of knowledge and what she did with music. Come and hear our Purim spiel, mighty wonders we'll revere on Purim, of happy Purim day.
Yeah. That was from her first book.
Yes, some Sephardic melodies did enter into what we sang at the SAJ, not nearly as much as would have been if Mr. Nathanson had, well, variety of things. But he himself came from Jerusalem, and he was already familiar, for example, not Sephardi, but Yemenite, he was very familiar with and used those tunes. A number of tunes were used, they're standard Sephardic nusach for parts of Hallel. Da 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 dum da 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 dee da dum da 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 dum da 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 dum da da dee da da da. We used to use that for whole chunks of Hallel, and I've never heard anybody else do it. Actually, they're lovely tunes, but not nearly as much as if that process had continued. I think that the Hasidic revival, Karl Bach and people like that, kind of, in this country, preempted some of the field in a way that we never got to some of the best Sephardic music.
Florence Cohn.
Hi, my name is Florence Cohn. I grew up at the SAJ, and I knew Judith and Ira very, very well, almost like family. Okay? Is that better? At any rate, when Miriam spoke to us not so long ago, she talked about, for her, the cardinal experience of the SAJ with the cantatas. I'm sure I am the only person in this world who goes to bed singing, "In the wilderness no wind blew, in the heavens no bird flew," etc. They really left its mark with me. I mean, I remember Bialik. That was Tehezakna. Another cantata. There were several. There were 7 golden buttons, many of which were done here. What is Torah, of course, was the #1 hit, so to speak. But Judith Eisenstein was a teacher. And from my early years, I thought she was a terror. We had Hebrew school met, I think all the classes met on Sunday or something like that. Otherwise, we never would have learned the cantata. Cantatas once every 3 weeks. Once a week for 3 days. At any rate, Judith was fun, which is what I wanted to say to you. As I grew up, I had a marvelous time with her. She was a smoker, so I thought she was very with it at the time. Judith and I are a fabulous comedic. They love comedy, and they were marvelous back and forth. Judith, we adored her, and Ira, of course. And I knew this series because I was lucky enough to form another Reconstructionist synagogue, and Judith and Ira were our co-rabbis every other week. And they would join us very often at different homes of the people in the synagogue on Long Island. And therefore, we knew them in a very different way. We had a lot of fun with them. I don't know if that's coming through. But the SAJ, at least Hebrew school, as we grew older, was a fun place and an exciting place. And I mean, I still, wake up singing, "In the wilderness no wind blew, in the heavens no bird flew." I don't think I know any modern music as well as I know what is Torah. As well as some of the others, but not as much so. She was a dynamo. She was fun. She was real. They were a real couple, by the way, and we admired them very much. She gave this series to us. She did it on the radio, right? Which was wonderful. And we, being congregants, not at the SAJ, but at North Shore Reconstructionist Synagogue, had the privilege of hearing this series of lectures on Jewish music. I miss them, as I'm sure their family does, very, very much, because they were part of my family too. And as Miriam said, she thought she was related. I didn't think I was related. My last name was Sack, and it didn't sound anything like Eisenstein. I mean, you had something to go by. I had nothing, but I love these 2 people. Judith really made an enormous pressure. So when I came to the SAJ, 40 years later, something like that, when I moved to New York, the first thing I wanted to do and to bring to the SAJ was what is Torah. And they were also teaching tools. They weren't just musical works, but they were used, and if you read or look at and review the liturgy of what is Torah and the words, you'll find a whole history of Jewish music in that. Anyway, I'm thrilled to be here today for a number of reasons, and to know that Judith really lives with a whole lot of people at the North Shore Reconstructionist Synagogue, because we all knew them as dinner mates, as fun. I do remember, just quickly, my first memory of Judith was she had a violent temper, and she... You remember that too? She was a very real person, besides being this marvelous intellect and musician, etc. And we had a good time. Finally, I went to Music and Art High School, and I wanted to play the cello. Anne plays the cello. And Ira, I think, started to play it. That's it. I had to ask which of you was which, by the way, when I came in today. But at any rate, she was a force in the SAJ Hebrew School, because we met in assemblies on the whole school did. And that's how we learned. We would never have learned the cantatas if we didn't practice it. And the great criterion we decided, and finally I'll end, we wanted to know if Judith would be any good, and she said, if you can make my father cry and he sheds tears, pardon me? Well, he was a fountain, and and he cried thoroughly when we did our cantatas. I also learned a great deal from the text of the cantata, and I still sing myself to bed in the wilderness. Anyway, Judith was a wonderful lecturer, and with her husband, Ira, they were a wonderful team, and we had a great time with her, and we're thrilled that her music has survived, not only in What is Torah and our Bialik and in other, but in the synagogue literature. So thank you very much.
What Florence was referring to is that bat mitzvah repeat that I did last year. I was telling her we were related to almost half of the SAJ. And then Florence got on and said, I'm one of the people you're not related to. And I said, you're not? And that's what she was quoting. I just wanted to say a word about the cantatas. Of course they're dated. What is Torah was based, this format was based on Ballad for Americans. And I don't know if anybody knows Ballad for Americans anymore. That too would come across as very dated if you listen to it now. Unless you were using it to learn about the 1940s, in which case it wouldn't be dated at all. You'd be learning about the 1940s. I mean, that's one thing you could use these for. Similarly, our Bialik, while not based on, is very similar. I don't know if you've ever heard The Lonesome Train, which was a piece that was composed about the death about the funeral train of Lincoln, and different people testifying as to what he meant in their lives at different stops on the train. And that's just what our Bialik is like, though my parents insisted they thought of it first, which is possible. So, of course, these are dated, but if you wanted to use them as period pieces, to educate yourself about Bialik, or to educate yourself about the ethos of the 1940s, you would get a lot out of it. While Seven Golden Buttons remains terribly usable, and is still used. And Reborn, which most people don't know, has the best music of all and could be used for Yom HaShoah anytime. And I strongly recommend it. Af Bri appears in Reborn. I love it so much, and my mother loved it so much, I was going to have Liz sing it till I knew that Bob was going to use it in his presentation.
So we're going to conclude now. We have a piece that we're going to share, and Mim, you'll introduce it. Yeah.
Okay, briefly, my mother wrote very few original compositions, and this is one of them. In about 1952, she wrote 3 pieces based on medieval poetry. She showed them to Hal Axe, who was then the conductor of the Interracial Fellowship Chorus of New York and also happened to be the SAJ choir director. He loved them, asked if he could have his chorus sing them, and they were presented in the Winter Concert of 1953 and basically never since. So we're very grateful to hear a rendition of that now by our professional quartet. Did you want to read the text?
Yeah, I'm going to read a translation. The original text is by Solomon ibn Gabirol, called Shecharticha. I have looked for you at dawn and at dusk. I have stretched my hands and my face towards you. I let out a rumble to you with a parched heart, like one in need who beseeches at the threshold of a doorway. The infinite heights cannot contain your presence, yet maybe you can find a small place to dwell in me. I will not hide in my heart from your great honor, nor my yearning fail till my tongue's last plea. Nay, surely I will offer thanks to you, Divine One, while the breath of life in my nostrils be.
Shecharticha
One final thought from a congregant, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, just what I wanted to say. Hi, yes, my name's Hillel Hirschbein, and perhaps this is just emblematic of what this is all about and what maybe Judith was all about. I'm not a professional singer. I'm just a congregant, which is kind of, I think, what she would have wanted and kind of the whole point of her music. Yeah.
Yes. So I wanted to just offer thanks and gratitude to everyone who came, to our speakers, to Liz Bolton, to Mim, to Bob, to our singers, Hillel Hirschbein, who's a congregant, and Jonah Mendelson, who's also a congregant, amazing, amazing singers. I want to thank Rabbi Lauren, as well as the SAJ committee chairs, Abe Klott and Donna Katzen, our programming chairs, Nancy and Allison, Eden, who's helping with programming at SAJ. She's around somewhere. Ashley Linton and Leah Miller on our technical staff on the Zoom, and our building staff as well. And just all of you, thank you for coming here in person. Thank you everyone at home who's joining us on the Zoom. I hope you are inspired by hearing about Judith's life, to learn more about her, to maybe come and be a part of the music here at SAJ, part in person, or as much as you can on Zoom. We're really grateful for all of you here, and just to say we have lots more events throughout 2022, continuing the celebration of our 100th anniversary. November 19th will be the big concert. June 12th, we have an amazing day of learning, exploring SAJ's legacy as a Reconstructionist synagogue, and lots more other programming. You can look it up on our website, saj.nyc/100 years. And that's it. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
There's somebody on Zoom.
Yes.
Somebody on Zoom who's